And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 241. Today we're going to be talking about the notion of light and shadow. So I've talked before quite a bit about, we've done a couple of episodes on shadows, but this is more about the interplay between light and shadow where there's more of a balance between them. So I think you'll find that quite interesting. Certainly if you're here to kind of improve, if you're looking to improve your notion of your understanding of photography, then you're in the right place. So we are live here on YouTube. If you happen to be watching live and not the recording, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Get the conversation started. Let me know what the weather's up to. All the usual kind of stuff. And, well, I guess then we'll make a start. No, not that one. Where do we go? Let's try that one. Yes, 241 episodes in, and as usual, I still managed to mess up the technicals right at the beginning. So, yes, here we are live on YouTube. Of course, if you're not watching live, you can still leave a comment down below as well. It's just I won't be able to respond to it immediately. Of course, do the usual things of like the video. YouTube always kind of quite likes that. I think if we're watching live and you click the like and what have you, it potentially encourages YouTube to show it to other people who might also join in the live watch. I don't know. I'm not totally sure on these things. Anyway, but before we start, actually, a quick happy Mother's Day to all those in North America, I think in India as well, and possibly across the rest of the world, except in Britain, where Mother's Day was a couple of months ago. However, here we are, yes, live on YouTube. And okay, well, I see we've got a few people in already, so let's see where we're at. So VG joins us from India and says, good evening, everyone. John says, hello all, and a happy Mother's Day to the mothers. April says, greetings to a beautiful sunny day, going to be 75 degrees or 23.8 in Long Island, that would be Celsius, in Long Island, New York. Happy Mother's Day to all. VG says, thanks John, and happy Mother's Day to all the glorious mothers out there. Susan says, hello everyone from a gloriously warm and sunny Kakubri. We've already had Mother's Day in the UK, but happy Mother's Day to those of you who have it today. Janet says, hello from a warm Mississauga, and Nick says, hello from Bath. This is great. Okay, so yes, it is here. It's well, a little bit of cloud in Castle Douglas, but it is warm and sunny, and it has been, well, sunny, if not amazingly warm, but fairly warmish for the last few weeks, really. We've had very little rain at all, which is highly unusual for Scotland at this time of year. But yes, we're enjoying this. It feels like a long summer, even though we're still in spring. You have to make the most of it here in Scotland because you can never be guaranteed that you're actually going to get that much sunshine in the summer. So if it comes out, you grab it whatever time of year you can. Right, okay, so where are we at? So, okay, quick update on the Smug Points. So basically, Smug Points came down to Anne and Amanda are both on 30 Smug Points each because last week they both sent in images for critique. So they got 5 points for turning up and leaving comments, but 25 points for sending in an image for critique. Everybody else who basically turned up and left a comment, they got 5 points, and if you didn't turn up and leave a comment and you didn't send anything in, then you've yet to get off the Smug Points leaderboard in May. That's not to say there isn't opportunity for more, because next week is also going to be a feedback session, but I will tell you more about that at the end of the podcast. So where are we at then? Happy Mother's Day, the Smug Points, I'm ticking off my little list. Top contributors, yes, introduction to light and shadow then. So today then, episode 241, we're going to be talking about light and shadow. So part of this came out of conversations with VG, who won the Smug Points accumulation for April, as to what we could talk about, and there was a little bit of thoughts about contrast and what have you. And actually next Saturday the 17th, I am in fact running a free mobile phone workshop here in Castle Douglas. If you happen to be in Castle Douglas, southwest Scotland, want to come along to it, and that is also going to be on the notion of light and shadow. So it seemed to be quite a good tie-in to do the podcast on this, because it means anybody who turns up to the workshop, after I've done the workshop, I can also refer them back to this podcast for extra bits of information. What I will also be doing then is, because I'm going to be tackling this topic, I'll be setting a challenge for, in fact, 3 weeks' time rather than 2. But again, I'll tell you more about that at the end of the podcast. So what's the thing about light and shadow? Well, like I say, I have done, I think twice before over the last 5 years, I've done a podcast specifically devoted to the notion of shadows. Now, you don't get shadows without light. It's the balance, it's that interplay which makes photography, but there is a difference in emphasis, how things are emphasized. Basically, light shows us what's there, but shadow tends to give us depth, emotion, mood, story, texture. You can't really have much texture, you can't have much depth if you don't have much shadow. So and I think, as I've talked in previous podcasts about, and I'm going to repeat a lot probably today, the thing about shadow is, well, we're dealing with a two-dimensional image. Okay, when you're looking at a photograph and you're looking at a screen here, you're dealing with a two-dimensional image. But we're trying to represent 3 dimensions, or sometimes trying to represent 4 dimensions if we're talking about movement, as we did a few weeks back. But just even a static image, that notion of depth, how do you create the sense of depth and feel and mood and texture? And that is the interplay between light and shadow. And very often photography concentrates so much on the notion of light because photography, photos, graphos, the Latin roots, or is it Greek roots? I think can't remember now. But the ancient world language roots of photography is about light, and then graphos, graphic, mark making, painting. So sometimes photography is called painting with light. Of course, some of you who've ever read my blog or know my blog will know I've called it painting with shadows, because I tend to feel that the shadows are the bit that are often missed and quite often add the extra real layers of depth to a photo, an image. Oh, Meg's joined us and says, hello everyone. I'm glad you managed to tune in, Meg. So now, while I've tended to concentrate very much on shadow before now, there is something about where you really try and bring together the light and shadow almost in equal levels, so that it's not weighted all in the light and it's not weighted all in the shadow. But when you get a kind of really strong interplay between the two, I think it can be a really fascinating area of photography, and it's one to explore, dive into, and then once you start to get an understanding of it, you can apply it to absolutely every other form of photography that you do. So it's not genre specific. You can apply it to street photography, you can apply it to still life, you can apply it to landscapes, you can apply it to portraiture. You can apply it to every kind of photography form that you have. So that mix then of trying to really emphasize the interplay between light and shadow is what we're going to be talking about today. Nadia's joined us from St. Fillan's, out on a drive to see the Mirror Man. The Mirror Man at St. Fillan's. That feels like something I ought to know about. Either that or it's a lyric from a song. Yeah, Susan's also put the Mirror Man question mark, Nadia. You might have to explain just a fraction more what the Mirror Man is. I have half an idea that there is a kind of sculpture, but I could be completely wrong. Or maybe you're off to the cinema to watch something called The Mirror Man. You'll have to explain. Give us a little bit of extra information, Nadia. Right, okay, while Nadia's typing that up, let's move on then to this notion of light and shadow. And let's throw onto the screen here an idea, a kind of starting point of what we think of with light and shadow. And here we're playing around with the notion of minimalism, negative space as well. But it allows us to get a clearer idea of what we mean by light and shadow. So when we look at the mug here, it's clearly being lit from one side. We've got the shadow falling off over here. And it's not, the shadow is really important, but it's not just the shadow. It is the interplay of light. And the way the light comes in, we have all the shadow to the left of this mug here, but then the light is catching the rim of this mug. We've got this wonderful kind of like new moon kind of, or very old moon, I guess, if it's that on the left, line of the mug as well, and a little bit of light on the mug here. And then it's not just about shadow, it's the interplay between light and shadow that really is what it makes an image like this. And so understanding that kind of gives us that start. Another object, so what we're talking about here is that notion of object and its shadow. The object is lit, the shadow is cast. Another example of this then would be this image here, where we have Jessica throwing her hair up, throwing her head back, the hair flies out. I've gone click, but with this part of this fashion shoot, which we did, and I've talked about this one, I've used this example several times before, but it's a good one. The light comes in and the shadow is cast on the wall. And it's not just an incidental shadow, this shadow then becomes an integral part of the photo. That if you remove that shadow, if we were to just cut this image in half, or she was standing in a kind of circle with darkness behind, so there was no shadow, or a black wall, so the shadow didn't show, it might still be an interesting image, but it wouldn't have the same level of depth and energy to it that it has by actually seeing the shadow. And in this case, we're then playing with that notion of diagonals as well, as Jessica leans forward to the right and the shadow conversely pulls out to the left. The hair's going up to the right, the hair's shooting out to the left. The hair of the shadow is also distorted because of the way the light is going. It's not straight onto her, it's a slight angle, so the shadow spreads out a little bit more and distorts. So it's a distorted shadow of Jessica. So that kind of creates this interesting interplay between light and shadow. So that's where very often when we talk about the notion of shadows in photography, this is our starting point. But shadows obviously are much more than just the subject and the shadow that it casts. There's also the notion of the shadow on the subject itself. So if we, in this case in portraiture, what we notice, so there is light coming from the top left of this picture, where you can, in this case, Eva's face is being lit up by the shadow, but we have also that little kind of Rembrandt triangle type of thing here, because the nose is creating a bit of a shadow, and her whole face, so the body, it's the face itself, the subject itself is partly in shadow. So, and that shadow there is helping to define the features. There's another light over to the right coming from behind, which is then lighting her neck. But because the lights are not covering everything, we don't have two lights at the front on either side. You know, what we have is lights sort of like that. And it allows for this line of, so we have light, shadow, light. A little bit of shadow coming from an earring. Just you can't see that, you can just see a glimpse of an earring here, side onto it, but then the hoop of the earring is where the light is coming through there. And so that use of shadow here is creating a much more dramatic sense of the shape of the face. And you know, the slight tilts here and everything, although the hairstyle and everything is from a different era, it still has that kind of film noir kind of feel to it, those notions. Not just a kind of a light shadow light, but quite a strong contrast, which you can very often get away with in black and white, I think, a little bit more as well. So the shadows are a really important, integral part of this, but so is the light as well. Another example of this is my friend Marcus. Just before we went into a gig, we were playing in a band together, this is several years ago, and he's having a quick cigarette outside. There's light coming through from the doorway of the venue. We're just standing outside. I happen to be the other side of him. I've got the camera. I do a quick click. And then in the editing process, as well as turning it to black and white, again, I've played with the contrast. So the shadows, he's got, you know, his face is, the right side of his face is lost in shadow, a bit like with Eva. But again, we have, this case, bit of the glasses here, which is catching the light, is just moving into the shadow, giving a little bit more definition. We've got part of the arm itself where he's holding the cigarette, so his own body is casting part of a shadow over. So the part, if we've got at this point, one part of the subject is casting a shadow over the other part of the subject. So the shadows are all on the person, but it's an integral part of it. So I hope this is kind of starting to make a bit of sense. Nadia says, I'll send it to you on a message. But for anybody who's, Nadia, please, for anybody who happens to be watching this who's not going to be out on the message, can you let us know what what the Mirror Man is? Is it a sculpture? Is it a movie? Is it just a personal name for something, an object that you go and see? Oh no, Nadia has. She's just actually written there. You're correct, Kim. He's a statue made of squares of metal sitting in a loch. He's also known as Still. I think that says STLL. Might be a slight spelling, or ST the second. I'll assume it's known as Still for the moment, unless you want to correct me otherwise. Okay, that's interesting then. Yes. So if anybody wants to go and look that up. On the internet afterwards, that could be quite a fun one. In fact, actually, I've been looking forward to it. If you grab a picture of it, post it in. That's another thing as well, Nadia. I mean, we have the Facebook group, we have the Flickr group. Even if you're not wanting to stick an image in for critique or feedback or anything like that, still show us the photo, show us where it is. Because I think that's another thing, just a kind of a quick aside here then. Just, where are we? Just for anybody who needs to know, we have the Flickr group, flickr.com/groups/UPwKA. Likewise, we've got the Facebook group, same kind of ending, groups/UPwKA. And these are places where we can, well, you can stick images for critique, for feedback, or for challenges that are set, but also for discussion and interest. And if you come across an interesting place, you come across something interesting which you think maybe other people would find interesting to go and photograph, then place it in these things as well. Share experiences and ideas and techniques and anything else you have. But it's not just about techniques and photography directly, as in, getting feedback on your picture. I think it can be really interesting if you found an interest, somewhere to go, which you feel is probably worth visiting and photographing. Share that with the group as well. Okay, where was I? So let's flick that back to there. Okay, so so you've got the subject and you've got the shadow, the light coming and then falling on the subject itself. So part of the subject is lost in shadow. Now, when you take that idea a little bit further and you move that light round, rather than from the side, you move it even further round behind the subject, what you then end up with is silhouette. So in this case, the subject itself is also entirely enveloped in the shadow side. So the light is the other side. The light is behind the subject from our viewpoint, and it means that we end up with silhouette. So the silhouette is the shadow, and then, but also because we can see, because it's directly behind, we also tend to see the light source as well. So it becomes that really strong interplay of light and shadow. And we don't, the interesting thing here, to go back to that notion of light shows you what it is, shadow doesn't, is we end up with the outline. So we end up with all the little edges of what's going on. We can make out what it is, or we can make out the shape of it, but we don't have the detail. The brain, when you have a silhouette, the brain starts to interpret and imagine what's in the space, imagine what the bit that we can't see. So if we take something like this one, this bit, I can see part of it was cut off here from the actually, I'll tell you what I'll do, just so it becomes slightly easier to see. No, I didn't mean to do that one. Okay, I don't suppose it really matters. I was going to open ordinary Photoshop, not beta Photoshop. But for the sake of this, it shouldn't really matter. I open that and then File, Image Rotation, Flip Horizontal, Save, close that. And then if I do that, no, okay, let's do that. Where are we? There we go. Doesn't really matter. The point here is what I really wanted to do was you to see the silhouette in this. So the point is that with the silhouette, that the brain starts filling in the spaces. And this is true of all notions of shadow within the photography. To go back to this idea, the light is showing us what is there. The shadow isn't. The shadow is giving us clues to what might be there. And then the brain starts to desperately try and work it out. And we do this because of millions of years of evolution survival. If the brain can kind of work out what's in the shadows, can anticipate or interpret little bits of what it can't see and make out the rest of it, then two potential advantages. One, there might be prey in there. There could be a food source. There could be a little animal hiding in the shadows that you might be able to eat. Alternatively, a predator might be hiding in the shadows. It could be a saber-toothed tiger sitting there ready to pounce out. And so the ancestors that couldn't work out what might be in the shadows either failed to eat or got eaten, and so didn't tend to leave a genetic line for us to be descended from. So we are descended from those who could sort of anticipate or interpret or have a good guess at what might be in the shadows. As such, it is hardwired into our brains that when we see something lost in shadow or silhouette, we can't help but start to look and interpret. And what that means, though, in terms of photography, is it quite often makes the photography that little bit more engaging. With a good use of shadow, whether it's silhouette or just lines of shadow, is that the viewer then engages that little bit more, because the viewer can't help themselves but start to wonder what's going on in the shadows, or to try and interpret. And here we can quite clearly see what we've got is we've got a man holding a camera. And you can see, as we move in, you can see the straps of the camera, tiny little bit of reflection we can actually on the lens, which isn't fully in silhouette, but we recognize the stance. And sometimes when we see it, we almost feel like a little bit of a sense of achievement that we have managed to work it. It's like solving a puzzle. We know what it is we're looking at. And then there's the games where you go, I mean, well, if you think about children's games where you have little block shapes and what have you, and you've got to put them in, where there's that notion of what is this silhouette? Is this the shape of a duck? Is this the shape of a dog? Is this the shape of an apple? So this notion of shape recognition and interpretation is right there in the very core of the way that our brains are made up. And so what we're doing with this then is hijacking that idea to make our photography that little bit more interesting. Nadia says still. So yes, still, STILL is the name of the statue in the loch, which is made of metal squares. Right. Okay. So so we've got that notion of, so in this case the silhouette is the shadow. The shadow is the side of the subject that we can't see. But what you can also do is you can mix where you get the silhouette and you get the shadow of the silhouette. So in a picture like this, for example, then when you stand, so we've got the tree, and the tree is more or less silhouetted. There's bits of light coming through some of the leaves here, but there's little bits of detail still vaguely available, but a slight tweak of the contrast. And that tree is pretty much silhouetted, except for the fact that we also have the shadow of the tree and the shadow of the fence here as well. So the fence as well as the tree silhouetted, but we've got the silhouette and we've got the shadow. So there's a nice, again, interplay between the light and the light source, which is just kind of glinting through the tree there, and the way the shadow is playing. So it's not just about the shadow, although without the shadow this ceases to be so interesting. But in this case, what we've got by including the shadow, we're creating a sort of reflection, a sort of asymmetrical symmetry with this rising. So we've got the tree coming up, we've got the shadow coming down, they're sort of balancing each other out, and then we've got the fence in the middle of it. Sky above, ground below. Susan says, just looked up the Mirror Man. He does look pretty cool, a little bit like Anthony Gormley's Another Place statues on the Crosby Beach near Southport. Okay, that looks like a fun one to look up. Okay, another version then of, yes, so then that other idea of silhouette and shadow here. This is riding on camels in Sahara Desert at night in the rain. Probably talked about this one before, might have been many moons ago, a trip that we did in Morocco, and here a jeep has come out, and we've got the lights here, the lights coming through the back of the rain. We're sitting on camelback. You can see the silhouettes here, but we're also getting the shadows coming off the silhouettes, and that's helping to really add to the drama of the picture. So that notion of silhouette and shadow, whereby what you're doing is you're creating shadows and you're placing the shadows into these places of light. Now, another thing you can do, which is close to silhouette, as we kind of start to swing the camera around back the other way, is there's like here where we have just a little bit of edge lighting. So whereas this person here, tiny bit of edge lighting, but mostly it's about the light behind. This person, I'm going to come back. This person here, you can see the light is slightly off and we're starting to get an edge there. And so, well, to go back to this one, which is what I was going to show you. Here we're using the notion of the edge light. So in this case, Alexandra is mostly hidden in shadow. But now, instead of you having something lit in light with a line of shadow, now you have mostly shadow with a line of light. And it's that notion here that the balance has swung the other way. Rather than it mostly being about, like I say, the light with the shadow, it's now about the shadow with the light. And I think that becomes a kind of an interesting other alternative interpretation of it. So most of the body is in shadow. Similarly with this one, we're creating a shape, we're creating a line, slightly more light in it, but still the majority of the body hidden in shadow. And now at this point, when you're starting to think about the notion of rather than having light and then having shadow projected into the light, we're now talking about the notion of shadow and then light projected into the shadow. And it's a subtly different kind of way of going about it. Here we have that notion of, we've got the silhouette of the tree and the branches and everything else, but because of the mistiness of it, the light is coming through and creating, we've got streams of light. So as opposed to, well, I suppose if we go back to the silhouette, the tree here, this is mostly about the light, and then we have streams of shadow coming through the light. Whereas this one here, we've kind of got streams of light coming through the shadow. And that sort of gives us a different mood and feel of that interplay of light and shadow. It doesn't have to be automatically one way, or it can be another way as well. And this is really what I'm trying to do. I open up your eyes or your thoughts to ways you can play with that interaction between light and shadow, where the weight of the light is, where the balance is, where the weight of the shadow is within the interplay in the pictures. Here's another one, only at this point the light is coming in sideways from it, or so again, this was taken actually on the same day in the same woods, slightly different place in the woods, because it had been a particularly misty day and the mist was all through the woods, and so you had all the kind of little damp particles in the air, and then the sun kind of broke through and so allowed so all the sunbeams just like really lit up. It felt like such a rare phenomenon. I've never actually experienced this since. It was the only time I ever managed to see it. So here again, it feels like it's a dark, shadowy place, and then what we've got is we've got the kind of streams of light coming into the shadows. Another one similarly here, where although there's reflected light and there's a sort of bluish sense to the snow in the woods, you feel that it's dark here, and then your eye gets drawn to the light, and then the shafts of light coming through the trees. Meg says, can you do front light? Well, now that's an interesting point, Meg, really, because in a way, no. Because when you've got front light coming straight towards you, all the shadow is going to be behind the subject, and you're not necessarily going to see the shadow because the person is in the way. And I think I've talked before, when I've talked about the notion of different angles of light, that front light, by and large, there are always exceptions, but for the most part, front light tends to be the most boring form of light. When you have front light, precisely because you don't really see the shadows. Now, even here, as I talk to you, I've not got front light. I've got a side light. The window is this direction. Okay, so roughly about 45 degrees off to there. This is then coming in, and if you look at so the light is hitting this side of my face, and then this side of my face is in shadow. If I tilt it slightly that way, we end up with that little kind of Rembrandt triangle bit where the triangle of light is coming across. The further around I go now, if you were standing in the window looking at me, I would have full light on my face this way. But because you're looking at this angle, this part of me is still in shadow. So as I move round, there's different kind of, it changes the shadow, where the shadow's falling on my face compared to the light source. But your viewpoint, the light is already always over there from the viewpoint of this webcam. So no, really good question, Meg. But yes, it's a really important part of understanding that in order to get the shadow, you have to have an angle on the light. And either if you've got an angle over here, then this part becomes in shadow. If the angle's further round, more of this part becomes in shadow. And if the light is right behind, then you get the silhouette. So when we come to something like this, the trees then are in silhouette because the light is behind the subjects, and then that is then casting shafts of light through the trees as well. So hope that makes sense. VG said, class shot, is that rim lighting on the ballet dancer? Kind of, yes. So just to flip back then, on this one, what's happening is the light here is roughly about, instead of being directly behind, it's behind and to one side. So just, if you think just outside the edge of the picture, but about 4 feet behind the ballet dancer, I've got a large softbox sitting there, and then that light is throwing, so that we've not got complete silhouette, which would be if the light source was directly behind her, but we are playing on that idea of it just catching the outer edges. And then I've played with the contrast in the editing to narrow down, to blacken down the shadows and create that contrast between light and shadow. Next up then is this idea then of the shadow itself. Okay, so now if you're playing, that notion of playing with shadows is where we don't even see the subject. Okay, so in this one, the subject is implied by the shadow. In a kind of like silhouettes, we're only seeing the outline. We're trying to work out what that is an outline of. And when you only see the shadow and there's no sense of subject, we're doing the same thing. So in this case, again, back in the desert, it's the following morning. We've camped overnight in the desert, and now we're taking the camels back, riding the camels back, because that was part of our trip in Morocco, was riding the camels out, staying overnight in the desert, waking up, watching the sunrise over the dunes, and then riding the camels back. Lovely experience. But in this case, as we're going back, I'm aware that the sun is casting our shadows onto the dunes, and there's a little bit of where the dune goes down and then comes back up again, and I glance down, and this then is me. If you can see, there's somebody in front of me then holding onto that camel, and then this is actually me on the camel, and this arm is holding on for dear life, because they really do go up and down a lot. And with one hand, my arm is coming up here, and else in this shadow is me holding on to the thing and trying to hold on to my camera and go click to take a photo of the shadow. And this is a spare camel, because we had more camels than we had for people. Well, basically, there'd been one person for various reasons went back in a jeep rather than, or in a 4x4 rather than on the camel. So there was a spare camel on it, and then there was a few more further back. But the point is that what we're talking about here is, here you have shadow but no subject. Meg says, thank you, Dad. John says, I've experimented with edge lighting on a model. It is a challenge. Yeah, it's yes, whole other. And I'm sure I've done podcasts on this before, specifically dealing with edge lighting. I can't remember off the top of my head which one it would be, but I do. But worth going back through the playlist if you want to see if you can find stuff on edge lighting. In fact, the chances are there'll probably be a picture of Alexandra on the episode card. So here's another example then of just the shadow. So this is me reading a book, and the light is the evening light is coming in through the kitchen window, and then it was hitting the wall behind. We've got some flowers on the table which are showing up in the light. But what I found was interesting with this was, while I was sitting here reading a book, and you can see the outline of my face and what have you, I'm reading with glasses. The light was hitting my glasses and actually creating this little streak of light through the shadow. And so you can see the shadow of the book. You can just about make out the edge of the book, which is just catching a little bit of those last sun rays. Just looking at this thinking, oh, it's a long time. I can't remember how old this image is now. It's quite a long time since we actually had these painted yellow. Different colour now, have been for several years. But tangents aside, the interesting bit with this was that the way the light comes through the glasses and then casts beams of light into the shadow. And if you've got any glasses, or even a magnifying glass or something like that, and it's sometimes interesting if you've got a light source to sort of move it around and see how the shadow moves within it. And sometimes if the distortion in the glasses creates in the glass, which helps to magnify so you can see what's going on, means that you get a change in the light into that actually happens within the shadow itself. So that's another thing to start playing around with. The next thing is the idea of a kind of a light coming through a translucent surface. So there's essentially an object behind the surface, and then the light is behind that. Now, in this case, this was a photo again, probably several years ago. I think I maybe talked about this shoot. Or so with this one, I've got a large softbox. It's about nearly 6 foot high, and within it is Isabel. Now, normally I use the softbox. I stick the lights in the softbox, and that's to project the light out. And that light was being projected out to give Alexandra her edge light on the ballet dancer. In this case, though, what Isabel said, well, what would it be like if I actually climbed inside the softbox? I said, well, no idea, never tried that. So she was the first one we ever tried this with. And so she climbed into the softbox, and then the softbox itself has this translucent material. And the idea is that you fire the light through it so it gives a wide spread. So it diffuses the light, so that rather than the light just coming from the single narrow source of an off-camera flash or a strobe, it gets spread out, so you end up with a light that is much bigger and gives a kind of softer shadows as it projects out. But in this case, because it's semi-translucent, it created, we could see through it to sort of partially see Isabel. But the kind of material it is, as she pressed herself against it, you can see here it got darker. So it got darker very quickly. So you can see like where her fingertips are just touching, really pushing into it. That's where it's at its darkest. The hand's quite very close, but not all of it is touching. Then there's a bit of a leg. We can see a sort of rough, shadowy outline of the body, but she's also then got her face pressed up against it, and then your tip of the nose is just pressed against the material as well, and then it drops off very quickly. Again, another bit of hand, probably a folded of hand pressing in, finger coming out. And so at this point then, we've got light and we've got shadow, but because of the translucency, it's become quite abstract. But it's that notion that the shadow is falling onto a surface, and then we are seeing the shadow through that surface. And that translucency is really quite interesting. What does April say? April says very sci-fi looking. Well, it kind of is. It's sort of almost alien-like, because it's not giving us a clear outline. It's not an obvious thing of what it is we're seeing. However, you don't necessarily, I mean, this is with the idea of a softbox and playing, but we see this in nature all the time. If we, for example, go back to the tree here, what we notice is we can see where the light is coming through the leaves. And the leaves, and where the leaves are turned, or there's leaves behind it, similarly there's shadows being cast on it. So let me show you a more clearer example of this, right? So here, these are the beech leaves appearing in the... No, they're not. Are they beech leaves or the lime leaves? No, these are lime leaves. Sorry, yes, lime leaves. Well, while I was out for a walk. And this is just taken on my phone, okay? I was out for a walk and the light is coming, so the sun is directly behind the leaves. But because the leaves are slightly translucent, where the sun hits them, it lights up. But where there's sort of leaves behind the leaves, or where the leaves are folded, they're creating shadows on the surface. So that translucency is allowing for a mix of light and shadow, even though we're not seeing it projected onto a surface from the front. We're seeing it projected onto the surface from behind, much like that picture of Lucy Ann. Another example of this then is this picture of a crocus, which I took earlier this year, again with the mobile phone, a cell phone. And the sun is coming from behind. We can see it's the translucency of it lighting up the crocus. But also, interestingly, inside the crocus, the stamen that's poking up through it is then casting a shadow onto the inside of, the inside stamen is casting a shadow onto the outer petals of the leaf. So going back to this notion of the interaction between light and shadow, we're now getting into this notion of multiple different ways you can play with that idea. So that's where you've got the shadow casting inside itself. Now in this case, what we now have is we have a subject, so this is Denise, where we have a shadow being cast on her by something else. So it's not just her own shadow, this is the shadow then of, in this case, a set of Venetian blinds. And in fact, actually, this is the same window that I'm being lit by here. This was taken several years ago, before my study became so full with everything. I couldn't do a photo shoot in here anymore. But back at that point, it was emptier, and I did a photo shoot. And there was light streaming through the window, and so she just knelt down by the window, put her arms onto the windowsill. And here then, we can't see the blinds, but we can see the shadow of the blinds. And so that notion then of the light where we can see coming through, the shadow where the blinds are being cut off, cutting off the light, is really creating a very, very different field. You can imagine then if the blinds weren't there and it was just straightforward light coming down, we would of course still have shadow, like there is a kind of dark bits of shadow over here, just like say that picture of Eva that I showed you earlier. There would be natural light coming in from the side, there would be shadow from that. But the shadow being cast by the blinds is what's then making this particularly interesting as well. So that shadow, it's not necessarily always seeing the subject and the shadow, or even the shadow of the subject, but here we have a different shadow being cast onto the subject. Okay, so, then the gaps between the lines of shadow is where the light is sort of showing us what's there, and our brain is filling in all sorts of bits and pieces. And it's a fun kind of use of that, again, interplay between how light and shadow are working. Another version then where you have a different shadow cast is this one. This is just taken, again, on my phone. I was out in the garden later in the afternoon, walking back to the house, and here we have the back of the house, and we've got with the chimney stack on at the top here, and here's a shadow of the chimney next door. Okay, so the way the light was falling meant that the shadow from that chimney stack was falling onto our back wall directly under our own chimney. And so that's kind of fun as well. So what we've got here is we've got the echoes going on. We've got two chimneys, we've got the shadow of the chimney, but it's not the shadow of this chimney, it's the shadow of another chimney falling directly underneath our own one. So that notion of a different shadow falling onto a surface into our picture, we can't see the subject that's casting the shadow, but the shadow then becomes an integral part of the narrative of our photo. And I don't have an example of this, but I have seen some fun photos where you've got somebody standing close to a wall and there's a shadow behind them, which is quite different because the shadow is coming from somebody else who maybe is, say, jumping. And you've got somebody jumping and they're casting a jumping shadow just behind or slightly to one side of the person who's standing there not jumping. So if you want to get clever with light and angles and shadows being cast, you could, and you play around with something like that. You know, grab your grandchildren or friends or parents or whatever you want. You know, have one standing, have another one off to one side, jumping up or doing some kind of different shape or movement with them, in such a way that the light is passing through them but being cast into the picture of the person. So that can be fun. Oh, VG says, pretty sharp shadow stripes. Beautiful idea. Thank you. Now, so that's shadows being cast. Another thing to think of is sometimes you can use shadows to shape the picture, to kind of draw your attention to where you want the eye to go. So in the case of this one, which was done at the same time, remember Jessica throwing back her hair, which I showed you earlier? This was done at the same fashion shoot. But this one, Katerina, in this case, we're playing around with the idea. We've got Katerina, she's creating all these wonderful shapes, and then she's got a shadow being cast behind her. But what's happening, both with this and the shoot that I did with, the shot that I did of Jessica, but less noticeable with Jessica, is I've got a single spotlight, and I've got this rounded spotlight. And because we're shooting at night, we're just getting this harsh thing. So we're getting that shadow, but we're in the circle here, that actually, just like on stage, that's really what this is about. I'm trying to if you think about when you go to the theatre, or you go, you know, so you can see that idea of the single spotlight coming down on the performer, and that's very often coming from the front, and the shadow might be cast behind them, but it's done from the front so that the shadow isn't interfering. But you do get this circle of shadow around them, and so what that is doing then is we're using the shadow to literally frame what it is we want to see. Okay, so that's another way of using shadow, is to cut off what we don't want to see. I mean, we all know about, well, most of you know about the notion of the vignetting, where you darken down the corners of an image to draw your eye towards the center. In this case, this is vignetting in the extreme, but it's not added afterwards as part of the editing process. This is set up by actually using a spotlight effect. So that kind of idea. Now, if we flick back to that idea then here of the desert in the camels, I was talking about the silhouette and the shadows here, but the fact is, all this around it, all this dark space, as the light disappears off into nighttime desert, becomes the same kind of shaping. Our eye gets drawn to the triangle of action, light, shadows. This is where it's all happening. We don't know what's happening up into the left. So there's that use of negative space, and the negative space there isn't for us to explore. It's precisely to draw our eye back to where we want to have the light. Then a similar kind of idea here then is that it becomes, now we're sort of moving into that kind of interplay where on the street light we've got light coming down, so we've got light hitting the face, the body itself is creating shadow and bits are disappearing into it, but we have light behind, so semi-silhouetting parts of it, and then we have shadow disappearing into the distance, and along with the curve of the road, in order to kind of draw our attention back over to this side of the picture. Okay, only what we're doing now, this person isn't actually lit by the lamp behind them, because then the shadows wouldn't work that way. They are standing under a street light, which is where they're being lit kind of from above, but I couldn't fit that lamp in as well, so I angled it so we could see the lamp behind, and then that shows us that the whole thing becomes implied that he's being lit by a street lamp. Okay, so we're playing around again, strong contrasts, light, shadow, interplay with them, which is creating the image. But you don't necessarily have to go sort of super hard contrast. If you take something like this, again, this is in Morocco, this is going up through the Atlas Mountains, through the Dadas Gorge, I think, can't remember now. But we're wiggling up this long windy road through this tight gorge, and at the top of the gorge is this building. I think it might have been, yeah, it's a hotel. And that's up in the light, but down in the gorge is in the shadow. And you can see that this little bit of wall here is where the road, the next bit of road we're going to be going up, and then it wiggles round and it then turns the corner and goes up this way, and then it eventually, there's another bit of road edging up there. It finds its way up to the top, and then you can pull into a car park. And I have a shot somewhere looking back down the gorge where I was standing up there shooting back down the way. I've seen other photos of it as well. I think if you ever go there, it becomes the place to take a photo. A bit like Robert will talk, Robert's picture of Yosemite. There's a platform there. That's where everybody goes to take their photo of El Capitan or whatever, and here down the Dadas Gorge. But the point is here is that we have the shadow of the rocks and the gorge, and then the light. The shadows are kind of there to sort of say, yes, we're down in something, and the light is then showing us up the hotel. So we're using the shadow to draw our attention. So again, it's that boundaries of, so essentially we're kind of saying nothing overly interesting to look at here, go and look at that bit. So we're using the shadow to shape where the eye is going to go. So the last little section I'm going to move on to now is where we really sort of try and pull all these elements together to get a more balanced sense of light and shadow, because most of what I've shown you has tended to be mostly about the shadow, mostly about the light. And yes, obviously there's the interplay between the two of them. You can't have the shadow without having light. But by and large, they tend to balance more strongly on the shadow, or they must balance more strongly on the non-shadow, on the lit up part. But if we take a look at something like this now, where we've got a few bluebells in a wood, late summer, late spring, late afternoon is what, early evening really. We've got the light coming through the trees. We've got the grass and a few bluebells lit up. We've got the strong lines of the shadows. We've got bits silhouetted. We've got leaves, the fresh green leaves, which are just like those other ones that I showed you, are casting shadows within themselves because of the other leaves. And then we're getting these little specks of light. And so there's a real combination here of light and shadow going on. And so that's one way of sort of balancing it out. Another one, recently I was up at Dumfries and Galloway Hospital, the Royal Infirmary, DGRI, often known for short. And they have this big atrium, this sort of entrance place where you go to, where they've got the reception and they've got cafe and they've got all the... And I took a photo. The sun was coming down through the atrium, and here I took a photo. So here what I'm doing is I'm playing around with that notion of perspective. I'm trying to sort of get myself in the center. So we've got all the lines taking us down here. So it's very much about, we've got this sort of, I've given it a square crop. We've got leading lines taking us down to the far end of the atrium. Here you can see we've got, tables and chairs, because just over, toilets there, but just over to the right, just out of shot, there's a cafe area as well. There's a place to wait. Here's the reception area. Here's the exit. Clock on the wall. Windows, different stories, skylight, light coming down, windows here, light coming down. But if we look over here, we've got all the shadows where the sun's coming down, hitting the shadows and creating. So again, I saw this, I took the photo, done it on my phone, and then afterwards I decided to put it into black and white, because the black and white really helped emphasize it's all then about light and shadow. Playing with the contrast as well. Okay, so I've upped the contrast. The darks are darker than they would be. The lights are probably slightly lighter than they would be otherwise. And it's then all about using you've got the architectural lines, but then you've got the shadows of the architectural lines overlaying and crossing over them. And then this was me heading out, walking towards the exit, and then as I got towards the exit, I turned around and took a photo back the other way, and here we have me looking back up the way. And so these shadows here on the right that are running down away from us on this shot are now on the left and running towards us. So it's the same shot, just taken, 1 minute apart, but now facing back up the other way. And then interestingly, the way the light bounces means that whereas here, this part of the ceiling, which has the lights sitting in the top, is all quite dark. It's but you start to see that it's slightly starting to reflect, slightly reflective material up here. That when we go back to here, it's now where the sun is hitting this bit, it's now bouncing up and reflecting much more. So the shadows are kind of falling in quite different ways, depending on whether you've got the sun behind you or whether we've now got essentially the sun in front of us. And again, done exactly the same thing, standing in the middle, focusing on this idea of perspective lines, and then making the most of the fact that we have these amazing shadows coming through into this sort of very defined architectural space. Now, another version, slightly before I got to this, as I was walking back, there was this long corridor, and amazingly, with nobody in it, or rather the people who were in it were right down at the far end and not particularly interfering with the picture. And so again, I took this photo, and this is because the sun is coming in. That atrium, by the way, is right down at the far end. You get to the end there, turn left, and that's where the atrium is. As if you'll ever be like, maybe Susan might be going, knows DGRI quite well. But anyway, we've got this long corridor. The sun is coming in from the right here, and you can see the shadows it's casting of the window frames all along the hall. And then because there are kind of patches where here there's a corridor that goes off over to another part of the building, and then the light comes in. So we now, the shadows are breaking up that space as it's all coming in. And that notion of really, absolutely, the balance between the light and shadow is what makes this photo work. If the sun wasn't out, if there weren't any shadows, it might still be an interesting photo, but it would be a totally different kind of photo. Susan says she knows DGR quite very well. Of course, your shoulder, I bet you were there because of your shoulder. Is that improving? By the Susan broke her shoulder a few months ago, been having problems with holding camera and taking photos. I hoping you're on the mend, continually to get on the mend, and it's getting better now. Right, and then finally, the last photo I want to show you for this is playing around with this one. I can't remember whether I showed you this one before, but this was again fun when taken with my phone, heading back home. We're just walking down the street, and I noticed the street corner here. This shop here has been empty for a little while, and the way the light was coming, it was coming through that window and then through the whole corner window and casting the light here within the shadow of it as well. And then likewise, we've got bits of the shadow of the corner coming in. We've got the road sign and the barrier gate, little gates there, and this line of light coming between the buildings. Okay, so and this then is very much about light and shadow. Okay, so the light is kind of casting into the shadow, shadows are being cast by the light. So this then is kind of where I'm coming from. Susan says it's getting better. Thanks. Okay, excellent. So this is to try and then kind of sum up a little bit of what we've been talking about. This notion then of light and shadow. You can't have shadow without having light. But where you get that light from depends very much, where you get the shadow from depends very much on the angle of the light, where the light source is coming from. Whether it's one light source, more than one light source, which angle, whether it's coming from the side, from kind of off to one side, completely at the side, from behind, from completely behind. Is the shadow then falling on the subject, of the subject, by the subject, for the subject? Is the shadow being cast by the subject? Is there another shadow being cast onto the subject? What's the interplay between the light and the shadow? And so this is then where we're coming to setting the challenge. So the next challenge, I can call it light and shadow. Actually, I'm going to call it shadow and light, just because next week I've got this light and shadow workshop just to try and stop confusing things too much, we're going to have a shadow and light challenge. Okay, so in the shadow and light challenge, what I'm looking for is a really good balance between the shadow and the light. I want to see the interplay. I want to have this sense of that the picture wouldn't work so well if one wasn't as strong, wasn't balancing up with the other. Okay, if you go and come back, rewind, watch all this. I'll section it out into menu bits by the probably early evening here. You'll be able to find that this will be broken down, so you can kind of leap to any of the sections that you want. Now the challenge won't be for normally I do 2 weeks, but in 2 weeks' time is Spring Fling weekend. Some of you may remember me talking to you about this before. Spring Fling is an art event across the region of Dumfries and Galloway. There's somewhere about 90 odd studios are opening up where you could across a 3-day weekend, where you can go and visit the artists in their studios, see their work, talk to the artists directly, artists and makers. And it's a fabulous event, fantastic event. Usually, quite often I've been in it, and so I don't usually do a podcast on that day because I'm too busy opening up a studio space. This year I'm not in it. However, my wife Maggie is. She's opening up her studio, and so everybody, I need to be available to help her. But at the same time, in the run up to that, I'll be helping Maggie. But then I really like going around and seeing these places too. So me and Meg will be leaping in the car, going off, visiting cafes, having coffee, and going and taking a look at various different studios. So all that coming down to the fact that there won't be a podcast in 2 weeks' time on the 25th of May. So this challenge then is going to be for the 1st of June. Okay, so before the 1st of June, certainly by the end of May, by the 30th of May, get your images in to do with light and shadow. You've got 3 weeks. You go and raid the archives if you have to, but you've got 3 weeks. Play with some of these ideas. If you have artificial lighting and you want to play around with still life, do that. If you have access to models, do that. If you want to try something fun with a couple of teenagers or kids where you have one of them standing and it looks like there's a shadow cast on the wall, but the shadow's being cast by somebody else doing something else, try that. Use the weather. If the sun happens to be out, and move around, play around with like the light behind the subject, the light coming from the side of the subject, different shadows being cast onto the subject, different shadows being cast by the subject. There's so much to play with, and that's really what I want you to think about and explore. And the more you do this, the more you go in and play with that, the deeper your understanding of light and shadow is, the better your photography is going to become. Okay, this whole podcast series, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, the whole idea of this is to help you improve your photography. And the better understanding you get of light and shadow, not just by watching these podcasts, but by going out and participating, by getting your camera out and trying things out. And remember, all the things you try that don't work are great because you are learning from them. Okay? We learn from the bits that don't work, and we keep going at it and keep going at it and keep going at it, and then by the time it works, we have a deeper understanding of why it works, and then we can repeat that, and we've got a whole new bunch of tools to take with us into the future, to future shoots, and our photography shifts up yet another level. So that's why we do these challenges, is so that you can really try them out. Obviously, if it turns out you have no time at all whatsoever, go and raid your archives. I'm sure you've got something, but you do have 3 weeks for this one. What that means is there is one next week, and next week is going to be a feedback session, a feedback critique section. So this is your chance to send me images. Now, if you want, we can use this topic. If you have photos where you've been already playing around with light and shadow, or you're having a go at doing light and shadow over the next couple of days and it's not really working, send me your images. We could do the critique section just on light and shadow if you want. Doesn't have to be. If you have something else, you've got a shot of a kettle, send it to me. If it's not working, if you're wanting feedback, if you want my eye to kind of help get you past your sticking point, then send me the image. So, not that, that. So either stick your group, you're into the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with, facebook.com/groups/UPwKA, UPwKA, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, into the Flickr group, flickr.com/groups/UPwKA, or email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. And certainly if you're wanting some kind of feedback with your image, if you can send me the raw file or the unedited file, if your camera doesn't do raw, you at least send me an unedited version of the JPEG, along with telling me where your sticking point was, and then that will help me to give you the best kind of feedback to advance your photography. Right, so that's basically it, I think. What have we got here? VG says, thanks Kim, given the tense situation over the Indo-Pakistan war conditions, we're not sure how things are going to pan out, hoping and praying things calm down. This is true, been seeing some of this on the news, and I'll thoughts are with you, VG. Hopefully everything will, hopefully leaders will eventually kind of come to senses and work out compromises, and things will de-escalate. A couple of people giving their thoughts to VG. VG also says, hope to participate in the challenge, and your photographs give me lots of ideas. Excellent. April said she loved the Shadow Town pic. Okay, so various sort of kind of conversation there, and well wishes to VG in India. So that brings us to our conclusion. Just a little reminder, if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Don't forget to subscribe, to like the video, tell your friends about it, invite them along to the next one, and go out and try and explore and enjoy, and send me your ideas for topics, for challenges, for questions, for pictures, for feedback, all the usual stuff. And so yes, get your images in for the feedback session next week, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Take care. Bye.